When I opened up my Bible this morning to Ruth chapter 1, I ran across this that had been given to me by one of our kids here. I'm not even sure when, and it says, God is strong. And I thought, that's interesting that of all places it would land in Ruth chapter 1 when I just probably stuck it in the Bible one Sunday. Because that's kind of what's going on in the book of Ruth. Even though God is not mentioned a whole lot, the strength of God and His power and His providence is apparent all throughout the book of Ruth. I figured out earlier that I am, by the end of July, I will be finishing up 9 years of preaching altogether. Some of it here, some of it in Eugene, Oregon. And I don't think I have ever preached a sermon on the book of Ruth before. And so kind of excited to get through this with you this morning. And obviously, because we've talked so much about character lately, one of the things that really stuck out in my mind going through this book was some of the good character traits we see both in Ruth and Naomi and Boaz, and what we can learn about being better followers of Christ, better mothers on Mother's Day, better kids here on Mother's Day, and just better followers of Christ in general. So Ruth chapter 1, and we'll begin in verse 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. Now, in the days when the judges ruled is a pretty broad area of time. If you go to your book of Judges, there's a whole lot of those folks, and a whole lot of them are kind of a mess in the things that they do. But someone along the way figured out that there is a genealogy at the end of the book of Ruth, and if there are no gaps in that, assuming we have everything there, then this is probably somewhere around the time of Jephthah and Samuel. So Ruth is around that time. So in the days of the judges, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. Just an interesting sidebar, by the way, this journey they will take between Bethlehem and Moab and the return journey that will come here in a few verses is likely the same road that Jesus talks about when he tells the parable of the Good Samaritan, that road from Jerusalem to Jericho. So they're traveling along this kind of dangerous road, probably even back then. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years. And both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So there's been a lot of tragedy so far in the life of Naomi. Here, just within 5 verses, she has to leave her homeland. She has to go to another place on a dangerous path along the way. And during the time of this journey and the time where she is there in this new place, her husband dies, and then her 2 sons die. And so she is left with these 2 daughters-in-law. I would imagine if we were to go throughout our group this morning and talk about different things that have happened in life, there has been a lot of tragedy here in our family as well. There's been a lot of times where there has been an unexpected loss, a lot of times where it seems like one thing happens and then things begin to pile on that and pile on that and pile on that. And just when you think, well, how's it going to get worse, you regret ever having asked that question, don't you? When I was a freshman in college at Harding, one day in January, I got a phone call there in my dorm room, back when we had phones with cords on them and all that, and it was the double ring, which meant it was off campus, and I picked it up, and I found out my grandfather had a stroke. I'd only been back at school just a short time, and I needed to go home and check on that, and I guess it was actually February, not January, and so got in the car, drove to the airport, flew back to Alabama, got there about 20 minutes before he died, and just had a few moments there, and then he's gone. In July of that same year, my grandmother passed away, and I thought, this is a lot for a 18-year-old kid to process in the midst of all this. We lived with my grandparents, so suddenly 2 out of the 4 people in our house were gone, and I thought, I was thinking this morning as Butch was teaching about happiness and joy, hard to find joy in the midst of circumstances like that. Definitely hard to find happiness that's circumstance-based. Naomi has all this tragedy around her. And then in verse 15, if we skip down a little bit further, Naomi, in the meantime, by the way, before we get to verse 15, has asked the daughters-in-law to go on their way. She doesn't want them to be stuck with her. She feels that they are young people that need to go on with their lives. They need to find new husbands. And if they are attached to her, this widow, they will never get there. And there's a struggle with that, and they don't know what to do. And initially, neither one wants to do it, but eventually Orpah gives in. And in verse 15, she says, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law," just trying to talk Ruth into going away too. And then the verse that we read at the beginning, "But Ruth said, 'Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you.' And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more." In Ruth, you find this amazing loyalty. And throughout the book, by the way, there will be kind of this back and forth of tragedy and loyalty going on. Ruth has the excuse and even the permission to go away to live her own life, for everything to go the way it should go. And Naomi says, just go. And Ruth says, "No, your people are now my people. These are now our people. I am part of your family now, and this is where I will stay." And so Ruth decides that she will remain with Naomi wherever it is that Naomi will go. So the two of them, verse 19, went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. The whole town stirred, by the way, and I want you to think about that for a minute, because here we are in Ada, and every now and then you will hear somebody, "Did you hear that noise across town? Did you see all the police cars going that direction?" And then suddenly there are all these rumors of what's going on. We don't know exactly the population of Bethlehem at this day and time. We know at the time of Jesus, it's somewhere between about 3 and 1,200, which is pretty good range, but if you could imagine a much, much, much smaller Ada, where really everybody kind of knows the inner workings of what's going on. And so if someone has gone away and then they're back, it's the talk of the town. And so there's a stirred up town around them, and the women said, "Is this Naomi?" And she said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever felt like you went away full and you came back empty? I remember, I mentioned to you that freshman year at Harding. I remember after 4 years at Harding, having changed my major a couple different times, run out of money and run out of time going home, and I could probably have described it this way. I went away full, so excited about all the possibilities of what would happen, of what it would be, and then I went home just empty and defeated, and everything seems to have gone wrong. And maybe you come here this morning that way. Mother's Day, it's kind of the running joke among preachers that Christmas and Mother's Day tend to be the days where everybody who usually doesn't show up shows up. And if that's you, I'm not here to guilt you, I'm just glad you're here. But I don't know what has brought you here other than Mom today. Maybe you feel empty. Maybe you feel like Naomi does, where everything was moving in a good direction and then suddenly it turned back around in the way you didn't want to go. And with Naomi, we have this play on words between pleasantness and bitterness. In their language, in their time, the name Naomi meant kindness or pleasantness. And so she was named pleasantness. And so you would imagine, Butch in class this morning was talking about joy, about how there are people you will be around that are just kind of joyful people. And they're smiling and they're positive and you just enjoy being around them. And then Naomi feels like things have shifted to bitterness. And we have probably either encountered people like this in our lives or maybe even been people like this in our lives, where things are going well and we're pretty positive and upbeat about things, and then something happens. And you see that person later in life and everything is different. Their expression is different, their outlook is different, everything has changed, and this is where Naomi is now. So she says, "Don't even call me by that name that meant kind and pleasant. Call me this, because God has dealt bitterly with me." So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. And almost like a little side note right here in the end of harvest, it's going to play a major role in the rest of Ruth's story. So in chapter 2 and verse 1, it says that Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." So Ruth objective here, partly is to eat, obviously, because they're going to need the grain to be able to be sustained. There is no husband there to gather that stuff for them. And again, by the way, if you're visiting, if you're not normally around church, it seems very old-fashioned and far away for us to think of, well, why doesn't this woman just go do whatever? Very different society than the one that we lived in, very dependent on the man to be the earner of things. And so this system was set up all the way back in the days of Leviticus, where if someone were in this kind of position, there was an area at the edge of the field where they may go and be able to find sustenance. And so she's going to go there in search of sustenance, but also in search of favor. Maybe I can live in such a way, operate in such a way, work in such a way that Boaz will look on me with favor, and then we will at least have a place where we can get the food that we need. So in verse 7, Boaz has asked his folks, his people, about who is that girl over there? Who is this person who's out there gathering and getting grain? And they said that they had spoken with her, and this is what Ruth had said to them. Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. So first, Boaz learns really quickly, Ruth is a worker. Ruth is someone who is not just going to sit by and let other things happen or wait for somebody to bring something to her. She is going to work and get done what needs to get done because she's been out there doing this with only a short time of rest. So Boaz likely is probably impressed by this. In verse 10, she goes to meet Boaz, and it says that he's willing to let her continue to glean in the field. He's showing her kindness, and she says, why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me since I am a foreigner? So we see that Ruth is not only looked at as this widow, not only looked at as someone who is attached to her mother-in-law who is also a widow, but she is a foreigner in this land. She is not someone who may be welcome here by a lot of folks. Why do you look at me with favor in the midst of all this? But Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and native land and came to a people that you did not know before. So she now has a reputation. And the reputation is not foreigner, it's not widow, it's not all of the other ways that someone may want to label her. It's how she handles herself and what she does. What we do around people that we don't even realize are looking is incredibly important. When we think about Mother's Day, and I mentioned at the beginning, all of the positives and negatives that come with that, and some feel great about this day and others don't. I know for a fact people that do not go to church on Mother's Day because it's too hard. All of the different emotions that go into Mother's Day, wherever you may be, you are making an impact on others in the midst of that. There may be someone here in our church family who does not have a good relationship with their mother, who looks at their mother in a negative way and looks to you as a woman in this church who lives in a godly way is what a mother is supposed to look like. Boaz looks at Ruth and is impressed by who she is and what she does, and because of that, he wants to do something in return for her and help her. So he says, the Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. So Ruth goes back and tells the story to Naomi and explains to her everything that's happened, what Boaz has done, what he has said, what she said to him. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law in verse 20, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, this man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. And here we begin to see, if we have not noticed already, the providence of God at work. One of the odd things about Ruth is that God is not mentioned very often. And when he is, it doesn't seem like there's like a direct action or somebody's talking to him or he's talking to someone. He's there within the story, but there's not a lot of direct connection. And yet what Naomi says here, right in the midst of the story, reminds us that God, even when not noticed, even when not talked about directly, even when we don't notice the direct action, God is working. And so God has brought these people together in this way to work out his purposes. And Naomi mentioned that he is one of their redeemers, which we won't go into the whole history of it in Leviticus, but there is this family set up so that if someone has loss, that there is someone there to help recoup that loss. And this is one of Boaz's roles. So in verse 8, Naomi suggests to Ruth, in the meantime, go to Boaz, get to know him better, and we will see where this leads for our lives. And so Ruth goes to Boaz, and in verse 8, she is in his tent lying at his feet. Or, I'm sorry, in the threshing floor, lying at his feet. And it says, at midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. And I would imagine it's kind of a confusing moment for Boaz. And here's Ruth down there. And he said, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. And he said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. All of them know that you are a worthy woman. And again, we see that it's not just Boaz that has seen the reputation of Ruth, but everyone around has seen that there is something different about this woman. She is a worthy woman. And in Hebrew, it's the same phrase that you will find over in Proverbs chapter 31, where we read about the worthy wife. An excellent wife, who can find? She is far more precious than jewels. Excellent wife and worthy woman, exact same two Hebrew words. So what we see in Naomi is kind of a prelude to what will be written about in the book of Proverbs. This is what that worthy life looks like. So in in verse 12, he says, and now that it's true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning. So he acknowledges that he is this redeemer, this kinsman redeemer for their people. And this story all gets related once again. And so Boaz has to go to, there is someone who has a closer relation that would be the first in line to be the redeemer. And Boaz says, all of this land, all of this stuff can be yours. And oh, by the way, you're going to also need to take care of these two widow ladies. And although the land and everything looked good to this other redeemer, he said, no, you go ahead. And Boaz does what he says he would do, and he redeems Ruth in the midst of all this story. And in chapter 4, verse 13, it says that Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. So she now becomes, on top of everything else, a mother. And if you were to look at these two women back in chapter 1, the likelihood that there is another child to come be a part of this family is incredibly unlikely. And yet, through the providence of God, moving everyone in the position they need to be in, the place they need to be in, this happens. And she gives birth to a son. Verse 14 says, then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. That God that you thought had treated you so bitterly, that you should change your name away from pleasantness to something a little more suiting, he's actually with you after all. This morning, if you have come here and you think to yourself, I have left full and now I am empty, you think to yourself, I'm far from pleasant, I feel like life has been a whole lot bitter toward me, know that the God that you may connect with some of those things, or maybe feel like is fully disconnected, that God is still there with you, with providence for you, wanting to bring you back to him. He shall be to you, verse 15, a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. So there is now going to be this restorer and nourisher. And as we look throughout Scripture, by the way, if we think of redeemer, restorer, and nourisher, these are all things that our God does. And if these are the things missing from our lives, there is one place that we can find it in the way we've been designed to receive it. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. They named him Obed, and he was father of Jesse, father of David. This redeemer, Boaz, is going to result in the redeemer for all of us. Because Obed, Jesse, David, and then we work our way into the book of Matthew, leads all the way down to Jesus. And all of the times that God's people throughout this book may have thought to themselves, where did he go and what is he doing? And why isn't he here? And why has he dealt with us so bitterly? And why doesn't he understand what we're going through? And why doesn't he do something to fix it? Was doing something to fix it all along, wasn't he? In the midst of horrible tragedy and loss, he brings around the greatest change that will ever come to mankind in his son. That is the God we come here to worship today. This morning, if you're here just because Mom is here and you want to be here for her, thank you for coming. Thank you for her. But I will tell you that what she would love for you is to know what she knows and to know why she is here. This morning, if you're here and Mother's Day is a hard day, know that God is with you even when the Mother's Day is difficult. Even when that relationship is hard or where there's a lot of loss there, in the midst of tragedy, God is working to redeem. He would like you to come to his son, way back, the son of David and Jesse and Obed, all the way back to Ruth. He would like you to come to him, to be baptized into him, and to follow him and be changed forever, to see the providence he has in your life. Or if you have walked away from that because you have felt empty, be full again. Come back as we stand and sing.